I am sitting here with the amazing Ashley, new mama, and she's also an occupational therapist. And she's going to share her birth story about being induced and also having an SGA baby, so small for growth. So, what that was like navigating, and just obviously, like, I'm sure there was some anxiety around that and all the things you've been through. So, thank you, Ashley, joining us from Ottawa. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
How old is your baby now?
So my baby is probably about 2.5 months now. She'll be 3 months on the 16th of August. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so this is your first baby.
Second baby.
Second
Yes.
baby. Okay, I have to like, I was like, wait, let's clarify. So how old is your oldest baby?
She's 3.5. So she was a December 2020 COVID baby.
Ah, yes, the COVID babies. I have one of those too. So you've got two little ones now. So just for context for people listening, and like we want to hear your birth story and also how it differed from your first birth and all of that. So I'm sure there's a lot to dive into here. Where should we start?
I guess I can't really talk about my secondborn's birth without talking about my firstborn's birth. So I have two girls now, so similar in that sense. Also, both of them are really small, but the whole navigation of everything was different. Um, I knew after Madison's birth, so I took your course. I found out about you through another mom who just followed you on Instagram. Because when I was asking, I was like, "How do you know how to push?" Like towards the end of my first pregnancy, and she was like, "Follow the Bell method," and then I ended up doing your course, but I didn't find out about it till like really close, like 2 months or so, or maybe 3 months before the birth. So I actually emailed you and I got the last like week 7 and week 8 like pre-sent because I was that like I was cutting it close, but I did make it through, had a great, pregnancy. It was actually worked out really well because during COVID, during morning sickness, I got to stay to myself, did a lot of walks. I was laid off for like 5 months. So I was able to just really like my job was just being pregnant and being happy. And anyways, I had an OB for the first one. I did a lot of readings. So I all the readings I did, I was more and more convinced that I really wanted to do a natural, like a unmedicated vaginal birth because I wanted to kind of roll with that like roller coaster of hormones and not mess with the body. So I did go to the hospital. Unfortunately, at the time, she was born December 16th, 15th, 2020. So I at the time I had to pick between the doula and my husband being a support person. And as a first birth,
Yeah.
that was a lot, but I ended up having my husband come in. We had the doula on the phone. If we reversed it, my husband would have been useless. Sorry, Matt. That's his name. But she was able to provide a lot of support over the phone, but it was a lot for him and it was a lot for me. It was a really long labor. I wish I stayed home longer. I used the bathtub, the shower. I had angels of nurses. They were wonderful. They made all the difference. Was able to come up with the goal of the unmedicated vaginal birth, minimal tearing. But I knew I wanted something even better this time. So that's kind of a bit of the pretext with kind of I this time I made an effort to call the midwife. Like basically, I was told as soon as you pee on the stick, apply for all the midwife offices because my goal was to have a birth at the birthing center.
Yeah.
So my husband's kind of old school. Like even though I've done all this research and education on like birth and safety with birth and all that. And I feel totally comfortable with a home birth and the birthing center. For some reason, he felt more secure with the birthing center.
Mhm.
So, anyways, unfortunately, the birthing center was closed down and it never opened. It's still not open because last summer they had a flood. But that was my goal. I envisioned like a really peaceful, instead of being in the hospital, having like a hotel kind of like homey experience, laboring at home a really long time, having my daughter kind of in and out. That's what I wanted for my birth. And I knew based on last time that, and all the more research I had done between pregnancies, that you just need to feel calm and safe and supported. And that was my goal. And unfortunately, as we'll get into it, it didn't quite get to that this time around.
So you were told you needed to be induced and you needed to go to the hospital. So let's talk about why they recommended that for you.
Yeah, so because I had a midwife this time, we had done a scan at 30 weeks. Um, I didn't get any late ultrasounds in with the OB with my first.
Mhm.
And with the 30-week scan, my daughter was showing up as 17, I think 17th percentile or so. So I was still kind of above the norms, but after the scan, I had met with an OB and she said that that's still kind of on the lower side. So it would be helpful to get another scan kind of um, at 35, or actually 36 weeks is what 35 for 34 weeks, I think is what she recommended.
Mhm.
Um, my midwife had already said that she recommended 36 weeks anyways, kind of as a standard practice. So we kind of we met in the middle, and I had a scan the day before 35 weeks. At the 30-week scan, my midwife was very transparent that unfortunately, if the baby went below the 10th percentile, she wouldn't be that main person. The care would be transferred, and she'd kind of almost be like a doula.
Mhm.
So at that 35-week scan, I was talking to the technician. I was like, my other baby was 5 days past term, and she was only 6.3 pounds. I'm like, I just make small babies. And then she's like, I'm sorry. She's like, but you're at the ninth percentile. So with that ninth percentile scan, it got flagged to the midwife, and I found out I met with the OB, and she was like, yeah, care needs to be transferred. I recommend a hospital delivery. So that was really upsetting for me. We have two in Ottawa. We have two main, like we have other hospitals, but the two main big ones are the Ottawa Hospital. One of them is the Civic, one of them is the General. And my firstborn was born at the General. And then this one would have to be born at the Civic if I wanted anything involved with the midwife.
Ah.
So although it was under the same broad horizon, I had to go to a whole new hospital. That was a whole other thing. I was like, I had a good birth at the General. Do I just do
Mhm.
that? Or do I go to this new hospital to keep my midwife who have built this relationship my entire pregnancy, which was otherwise uncomplicated.
Mhm.
So that was like, and that was again, it was at 35 weeks. So it was like I went through a lot of emotions, lots of crying. It was like mourning like a death of what I wanted for my birth. Um, yeah, and the OB was not sympathetic at all. She had a resident and he gave me the Kleenex, but she just kind of walked out of the room, was like, you know, it's recommended to do a hospital birth. And she's like, it's gonna be okay. And she just kind of walked away. And that late in the game, again, I could have transferred to my other one, or I could have talked about another OB, but it was all just so late and it was already so stressful. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
then yeah, so then after that, I had to go to my scans. It was recommended to go to a scan. I think it was every week with SGA babies, where they do like an ultrasound where they look at what's called the biophysical profile. So I think it's marked out of like six. It's like movement, tone, fluid, that kind of thing. Um, and at the weekly scans, it was all pretty good. The only thing I think, like, she was kind of on the border of like the flu, like the blood flow to the placenta. She was kind of, that's what they were worried about the most, is that they were worried about the blood flow. It was kind of like on the limits.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, and they can only check the weight every 2 weeks because they don't want to do it sooner than that. But so they're just on the weekly scans, they're just going off of like the baby. And again, she was great. Like she was moving in there, um, kicking around. The fluid was good. But I think it was so yeah. So I think it was the 30 almost. I think it was almost the 37th week,
Mhm.
um, where I'm just trying to remember. I have it kind of here. There's so much going on. There
A
was
lot
so
of
much.
details
Yeah.
to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I think at the 37th week, she was 7.5th percentile. And the OB said at the time, she said, uh, basically she said all SGA babies, the recommendation is induction, like they need to be born by 39 weeks. And I said, why? And she said, well, she said the risk is stillbirth. And I said, well, what percentage is that? And she couldn't give that to me.
Mm.
Um, and I looked up evidence-based birth. I really like that website. It really was reassuring to me. And that one said it's like a 6 to 7, if you go post-term, it's 6 to 7 times more likely to have a stillbirth.
Mhm.
Which if you look at the absolute risk,
Right.
it's actually not that much. So like I looked into like the relative risk, which is like compared to everybody else, which is the 6 to 7 time, but the absolute risk, like post term for the normal people is only three, I think, out of 1,000. So 6 to 7 times that is still quite a low number out of 1,000.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I was trying to stay positive, but there was so much emotions at that point because you have I with all of my research, and all my prep for birth, I did like a hypnobirthing course, I did your course, listened to all the podcasts. um, Induction's not necessarily like a cause of a C-section, but it's oftentimes related because of the continuous heart rate monitoring. You're in the hospital setting, you're not quite in control. The contractions are more intense. So yeah, it was all kind of like this talk about induction. It really stressed me out,
Mhm.
and it really was emotional. Um, and um, and that was just my biggest fear, honestly, was to get an emergency C-section
Mhm.
under general anesthesia. Like that was like I was like, what if I'm doing this? And because they're heart rate monitoring and because they're more vulnerable when they're smaller, I was like, that would be so traumatizing for me, especially when I've envisioned this even more empowering birth.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it was 38 weeks and 3 days, I think, or 4 days. I had a scan, and that scan came back. It was they didn't like the blood flow, but also they do the heart rate monitor where they put the strap on, and they want the baby's heart rate to be below 155 beats per minute. And it was above it because she wouldn't stop moving. I like tried to go pee. I like tried to do all the things, but I think it's because I was kind of like I was a little bit stressed, and then so anyways, but they didn't like that. And I was prepped for that day at the like 38 and 4, whatever it was, that I would go home, I'd be able to negotiate a few days because I wanted to push it as far as I could.
Mhm.
And because of that heart rate, the OB walked me over to labor and delivery.
Oh, you weren't mentally prepared. You're like, I didn't think I was going to be having a baby in the next day or two. But
Yes.
they're like, you
Yes.
have, yeah, the risk. And ultimately, like, did you feel supported in that moment or no?
So with the scans getting more and more like I used to have such a good association with scans, but after that 35 weeks, like every scan was disappointing. So I had my husband drop off my daughter to daycare that morning. I was starting to kind of get some power back a little bit. Like my daughter's only in daycare 3 days a week because I work part time, and and the scans actually after 38 weeks were she recommended two times a week. So that's like the majority of my time that I had my me time that I wanted to like prep and do all my like, hypnobirthing and all that kind of stuff. And so I at that meeting, I had taken my power back. I'm like, if this is half my day, I'm gonna be listening to my like hypnobirthing. I'm gonna listen to my music. I'm gonna walk over from my car, and I'm gonna, instead of just sitting there kind of stressed in the waiting room,
Yeah.
and I'm also gonna make sure that my husband comes with me because I found the OB at the appointments he was with me. She was
Mhm.
just nicer. Like I don't know. She like looked at my file, and I think she just saw that I like wanted this like natural like home birth and everything like that. And she's like this, you know, she thinks she knows more than me type thing. And then with my husband there, I think, I don't know, she was just always nicer and kind of, I don't know, like a little less firm. And my husband would be able to kind of like summarize everything. So he was with me, thankfully. And he's like, okay. He's like, I guess I'm getting Madison, who's our firstborn. I guess I'm getting her from daycare. Picked her up. We had my mom come over so that she could spend the night. Um, and leading up to this, I had all my close friends. They all kind of knew me. And some of them, I was like an inspiration because of my first birth. Like, despite COVID, despite it being my first birth, I still kind of had this very empowering birth. And and they saw me vulnerable. Like, I went to dinner with them and I was in tears. I was like, I don't want this induction, but I also don't want my anything wrong to happen to my baby, right? Like, at the time, every scan she was showing healthy, but you know, you're just at such a vulnerable stage, especially at the end of your pregnancy. And an SGA baby is one of the reasons for an induction. It's not like an unnecessary reason. It's on that list, and you have that list on your profile. And yeah, once it was that bad blood flow, or that tending to be bad blood flow, they had diagnosed it as intrauterine growth restriction, which is, that was within like 5 days, but still they're like, pay attention to the kicks and like all this stuff. It's just so much to it's just so much stress. Anyway, so they were really supportive. I had my doula, and I also had a birth photographer that she's also a doula, and she's like the biggest sweetheart. I had conversations with them, like my best friend, like one of them is in Toronto. They were all just so supportive. Um, but as I was in that room after I got admitted, I cried for like a good few hours. I was just, you know, I was like, wow, this is really happening. I think I just wanted her, because I went past 40 weeks with my first. I just wanted her to be in there, as long as I could. And I just thought I could keep pushing it back because she kept on being healthy. And I'm just crying there. And I remember the first nurse was just like staring at me. She was like this young, like, she's this young, like blonde nurse. And I don't think she knew what to say. And then the other nurse that came in, she was like super confident. She's like, we do this all the time. She's like, you're gonna be here, Ashley. She's like, for like 3 to 4 days. She's like, some of these can take 3 to 4 days. She's like, it can take 3 to 4 days. She's like, you know what? She's like, the catheter is, which I had, oh yeah, that was the other thing. My OB the week before had given me a pamphlet. She's like, we're gonna strongly recommend induction next week. Here's a pamphlet. And that's all I had. It was like little tiny paragraphs of each induction method. And I was like, okay. And anyways, so I picked the Foley catheter because there's no like medication, and it seemed to me to be the least invasive based on like your information, the evidence-based birth, all that kind of stuff. She said, yeah, she said, this is gonna, you're a good candidate for this. And then she's like, we can use Pitocin. She's like, the good thing about Pitocin is we can turn it off like in 10 minutes or something, we can turn it off. And she's like, we're gonna go like kind of step by step. And she was very like firm and to the point, and she's like, it's going to be okay. And so that was helpful too. But it's still, to me, I was like, well, my last one, I was kind of like, it was a long labor, so I used a breast pump, and that actually got the contractions started. So it's like, I'd be willing to do that, and they're like, well, you're probably gonna need more than that.
Yes.
And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, but I want to try the breast pump first, because with all this induction stuff, I was like, if I have a small baby, what if I don't have enough milk? Because there's going to be even more emphasis on pumping or like whatever. And I'd never had to do that with my first. I just did everything on demand. It was easy. So yeah, like I was doing all the things to like naturally induce like the couple works prior. I was doing the dates. I was doing acupuncture. I had expressed so much colostrum. I was like, I'll express even more colostrum in
Oh
this.
my God.
I will get that. Like, I just want these contractions. I want everything to be kind of like as natural as possible.
Well, it
So,
was an act of surrender for you, like all of this, because
yes,
you were trying, what I'm hearing to recap is that you're trying so hard to do literally, and I want to put this in like all caps, all the things. Like you're trying
yes,
to do all the things, and yet there's an element that you don't have control over. You don't have control over this blood flow restriction. You don't have control over the fact that your baby is now below the 10th percentile in terms of size. Like, and now you've got to have, and people listening, a Foley bulb essentially is like a balloon that they insert vaginally and they blow it up to mechanically sort of expand or dilate your cervix. So it's a mechanical induction versus Pitocin where they're injecting you with an IV filled with this medication, like synthetic oxytocin. So sometimes you do a combination of both. So tell us, what did it feel like for anyone listening to this who's about to get a Foley induction? How did that happen for you? How did it feel?
Yeah, so I actually was really happy. Basically, if I went the full 3 to 4 days with the induction, like they said, I would have had more exposure to that OB that she like stressed me out. I had this other really nice OB, and she came in and she basically had me spread my legs open, put it in there. She's like pumping it up kind of like a balloon. I've never even had like a normal Foley because my first, I didn't do an epidural or anything. So I've never had any kind of like catheter of any size up there. So it's basically, they said it's like the baby's head is like putting more pressure on. And so it helps you to dilate more. But you can't put it in unless you're a little bit dilated. So I was like 1 centimeter dilated. And I think because I was doing all the things like curve walking, everything, I was like, I was a good candidate for it because I think she was already starting to kind of come. Like I woke up the day of the appointment with the Braxton Hicks, and then they kind of stopped as I was getting ready. So she said, I think I can get it up there. She did. I honestly didn't really like, I didn't really feel it. It just, they're like, they taped the thing that hangs down, like there's the balloon and then there's this little like string of like, I don't even know. Anyways, that gets taped to your leg.
Mm.
So it was May 15th, the day before my daughter was born. And I'm walking around with these, like, it's not super low down on the thigh, but I had like these exercise shorts on. And so like it was strapped onto the left side of my leg. And they let me leave the hospital, but I wasn't allowed to leave hospital grounds. So it was a
Okay.
beautiful day. My husband came back with my daughter and my mom and like they gave me hugs and all that because there was all this talk about induction. I had my hospital bag packed with like I had this little like, it's almost like an iPad, but it's like this screen with like the pictures that make me happy and like
Mm.
the eye mask, earplugs. I had a Bluetooth speaker. I downloaded this like 8 hour coffee house playlist on Spotify
Nice.
that really because again, I didn't know how long my labor would be. So I didn't want something we'd have to kind of restart. I had all my comfy pajamas. Like I knew I didn't want to be in that stupid hospital gown because I knew that there was an option this time. So I had my Lululemon, like the little crop top, and just I don't know. So I had that all ready to go. But again, I'm prepared at this point for it to be like a 3 or 4 day process. So they said because I have an SGA baby, I'm also not allowed to go home first.
Mhm.
Um, because they have to monitor the heart rate and all that kind of stuff with a baby. So the reason I was admitted like on the spot was the heart rate. But when I got moved to the room, every heart rate reading thing was normal. So it was actually like they're like it can take 3 to 4 days, which I was like, can I just go home then? Because it can't be that imminent.
I love that you just like did not stop asking. You did not stop advocating. You're like, but what about? And they're like, Ashley, no, honey, you're
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're like, "You're doing this now," and my husband's like, "We're doing this, like we're in it."
yeah.
But again, it took all that crying and that accepting. I was like, "Okay," I'm like, "I'm gonna make this like as hospital-like as I can." So I set up all those things, and I was putting my things on the little shelves, and they're like, "Well, you can't use that shelf because we need all of our medical equipment." And I'm like, "Can I like leave?" I'm like, "It's such a nice day," and they're like, "Well, you have to stay on hospital property." So I'm going around the hospital. So this is so
Paintball to walk with it in? Like I'm just picturing you waddling around the hospital with this bulb inside of you and like a thing taped to your leg under your
Yeah,
bicycle.
so again, I didn't really feel it. Like I like a lot of people apparently when it comes in, they start contracting pretty much right away. Um, but for me, I didn't really feel too much at first. I did some laps around the hospital. So basically got put in after my appointment that was kind of late morning, got put in around 2:30 in the afternoon. And then my husband did all the bringing my daughter, my mom to the room. um he had a nap. I tried to eat some of that horrible hospital dinner, and I was like,
Oh,
if this is 3 days, I'm like, I want to have some good food. I'm like, when you wake up, let's have some good food. So I guess it was like around like 6:30 or something, I started to kind of like walk around the hospital. I did a couple blocks. I did like the whole perimeter of the hospital because I'm like, I don't like being still. I like being active. Just for context, I did like the Pilates push prep this time around again, uh, one day, and then I did a yoga, like a prenatal yoga on my phone for 30 minutes the other day. Like I was always doing something to tune into my body and to also like learn how I relax and I surrender. And I think that really helped me. And again, I put my earbuds in and I just took my time and I was starting to kind of like feel a little bit of like what I call period cramps. And
Mhm.
that's what I said like in early labor with my first. I just kind of downplayed it
Yeah.
because it does. It feels like you're kind of getting like period cramps. I don't know. That's all
I
I
say the
have.
same thing. Same. It's like, yeah, and then they get more intense, but yes, I agree.
Yes, yes. And then I came in and I told the nurse that I was starting to experience that. And she's like, okay, she's like, that's contractions. And she's like, I need you to tell me about that. And she's like, I don't want you to downplay it. And I'm like, okay. And then so then I asked if I could leave again. We were gonna go, my husband and I wanted to go get some food. And
High
she was
risk at this
like she's
point.
like and she's like, this is like the 10th time she's told me not to leave hospital property. But my husband's like, we're leaving hospital property. We went like to this like it was like a 5-minute drive. We went to this deli where like my first pregnancy I ordered this like sandwich. It was like a chicken avocado sandwich with like real chicken, not bad for the baby because there's no like it's not deli meat.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I had a Nanaimo bar. We ate it at a park. Like again,
Mhm.
it was probably like a 10-minute walk from the hospital, but we were like rebellious in that moment, but it was like it was needed. I was like, this is we're doing this. And I'm like, it's going to be okay. And so we're eating this sandwich. I'm eating the delicious Nanaimo bar, like probably so much sugar, but it was probably what I needed.
Yeah, of course.
Also with my first, I threw up. I was so nauseous in pregnancy, not at all, in labor, not at all with this one in like active labor. So we get into the room, we were talking about watching a show and I was like, if this is gonna be 3 days, I need to like actually sleep. And my husband's a snorer. So he's like, are you sure you want me to stay? And I'm like, yes. I'm like, I just want to cuddle and I'm getting ready. I had all the lights down and he's like, should I turn on the lights? I'm like, no. I'm like, we're not turning on the lights. I'm like, no lights. We're gonna put on my flashlight on my phone. We're gonna listen. I was like, we're not turning on the lights and do not turn on my lights in labor. I'm like, do not.
Yeah.
And they already had the labor ball and everything. And I was on the hospital bed and he was going to sleep on that chair, the horrible chairs they give you. And I was like, can you just get in? I want to cuddle. And so probably by the time I got to bed, actually before that, I was on the toilet and I was like, you're feeling like the intense pressure and on the toilet. I don't know, I spent so much time laboring on the toilet, just everything kind of let
Yep.
goes. Like, I think something's happening. I'm like, but again, it's supposed to take 3 to 4 days. I'm like, I just need to focus on sleeping. So we go into bed and I'm asking him to like I'm almost falling off the bed. You can imagine my pregnant
Yeah,
belly.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
like over 6 feet and he's like spooning me and I'm finally trying to like fall asleep with the lights and I'm like feeling contraction, like more intense contractions on the front of my legs, like so much that I couldn't just like
Yeah,
breathe.
yeah.
And so I'm trying to like I basically was holding the bed. I'm feeling the contraction in the front of my legs. I probably did that for about 5 or 6 contractions until I call the nurse and I'm like, do you have anything that you recommend? Like I had the TENS machines from the doula that I had. I was like, do you have anything that you recommend for like the front of the leg contractions? And she's like, Ashley, she's like, this is an induction. She's like, these aren't real contractions. And she like left the room. She's like, page me if you need anything else. So I go through a couple more contractions and I call her again and I'm like, I want to try something. And she's like, don't waste that good stuff for like this is gonna be a long row. She's like, don't waste it until like until you're actually in labor. And she's like, I know it's not on your birth plan. I read this plan. And again, my plan was very like no intervention. She's like, but I'm going to tell you about this narcotic pill that you can take. She's like, it's going to make you sleep. It wears off in about 4 hours. I don't recommend it in active labor, but in your case, she's like, I am recommending it so that you can get some sleep. So it's like, okay. She's like, I'm gonna go on break. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like think about it.
Mm.
Um, she goes on break. I call my doula. She's listening to me and she's like, and I'm like, this sounds like real, this feels like pretty real labor to me.
Mm.
And she's listening to me. The contractions are spread apart. I don't know how many minutes, but they were regular. And I was like kind of having to breathe through them. I'm leaning over this birth ball at this point, like leaning forward. And she's like, before you agree to anything, have them try and pull out the Foley.
Mm.
Because on this toilet, I was trying to pull it out. They told me to do it every time you take a pee. That's what they tell you as their protocol. I didn't know how strong I was supposed to pull it or anything like
Right.
that.
Okay. It's not a lot of
So
direction.
then, yeah, and like I didn't want to like tear anything or like pop it or I don't know. And so the nurse comes in, falls right out. So she's like, okay, she's like, I'm gonna go get your real nurse. And she leaves the room. And at this point, I'm leaning over the ball and my abs literally, I felt them push my water out all over my feet, all over my legs, all over the floor. I'm like, oh my God, my water just broke. And Matt, my husband, just sitting there on the chair. Like at this point, he'd gotten out of bed because he's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
and and so the my nurse comes back in and she's like, can I do a check? And I'm like, okay. So I lie down on my side and she does a check and I'm 6 centimeters dilated and my body had sorry, I took over. It was in go mode. And it was crazy at this point. So what I wanted was my body to do it. And apparently it doesn't usually happen with just the Foley. My body went into its labor on its own. So after this, this was probably about, so I had called the doula about 12:15 a.m. Talking to her about that medication. And this, I think at around 12:45, I called her back in the morning and she said, and she was listening to me. I was like, can I get in the shower now? And they let me get in the shower. We put the water on my back and she's listening to me. She's like, I'm on the way to the hospital. And then I'm like, call the midwife. And so Matt calls the midwife, the pager system, and he's like, is this the right number? I'm like, you have to press the pager number. And I remember it vividly. And again, the lights are off. I'm like, bring in the coffee, like bring in my speaker. And I had that coffee house playlist on at this point.
Nice.
And for me, I remember so much with my hearing. My eyes were closed for a lot of the labor. So it was very short period of time that the doula and the midwife came in and the nurse was kind of in and out. And this time around, I just felt like, and again, I had done so much research with your body. You need to surrender and all this stuff. But I felt my abs like they were like, I wanted to push. And I think that was what they're supposed to do, right? Because the fibers are kind of pushing down to try and get the baby down and kind of maneuvered. And for me, I tried to use the horse breathing, but I couldn't do it as long as relaxed as you did in your videos. I'd be like, and then that would be it. And it wouldn't work. So the doula was like, say house and say it low and long. So I was just saying house and then trying to like do everything to kind of bring everything down and saying and I was just and I also would intermingle with open because that kind of I didn't plan on this before, but I was like house open and that would kind of get me through each one. And I was in the shower for a really long time. With the SGA baby, you need to have the continuous heart rate monitor, but that's really hard to keep on when you're moving around. So they were like struggling to have it kind of like put on. And I was like, I don't care. Like I didn't want it there anyways. And like, but there was no issue at all in the labor with my heart rate or the baby's heart rate. And I just remember there was so much positive female energy around me. This time my husband could just kind of sit down and kind of take a break. He helped a little bit with the shower head. My birth photographer, unfortunately, like right before we went to bed, she wasn't able to come because she had illness in the family. But my doula, apparently I was pretty hands off as long as they were kind of cueing me. She was able to take a bunch of photos, which they don't usually do. But she said, I don't want this to be taken away from her. And she was telling that to my husband and kind of helping him as well. He's really strong and like a alpha male, but the whole feeling like he can't control anything, it's hard for him. So he's like pacing and he's like, but I think he's happy. He doesn't have to be in there because it's very uncomfortable for him. So yeah, I was in the shower for a bit and then they're like, I was getting so hot that I went back to the birthing ball and I did that for a few contractions. And then I went and I laid down on my left hand side on the bed for the next series of contractions with the TENS machines on my back. And I just remember I kept on, like, you can do the surge and like increase the intensity. And I kept on increasing it, kind of like each one. And then with my legs in this ball. And then after that, pretty soon I was like, I can't, I'm having a really hard time kind of breathing through these contractions now. And they looked and they were like, if you're not, like, your body's like telling you like you need to push. And then a side note, the at this point, because I was doing so well and the baby was doing so well, the OB was like, do you want to transfer care to the midwife?
Oh, wow.
Um, and apparently that's like unheard of. That like never happens.
Wow.
So the OB and the other nurse left, and it was just the midwife, my doula, and Matt in the room. And the midwife was super chill. She was like, I had my leg like up to the side, and I know you say to kind of have it internally rotated, but I needed to like have my leg up out of the way. So I literally, she like let me put my knee like on her shoulder
Right,
as
right.
I'm like starting to push. And she said that it was probably between like 3 and 5 pushes, and it was within 10 minutes that my baby was out um, at that point. And yeah, it was super empowering. My abs, I think it's muscle memory. And I think also the
Yeah.
breathing in between, like it was so fast this time. And yeah, so from the Foley being pulled out, it was like 3 hours that my daughter was born, and 10 minutes of pushing. And she looked at me and she's like, there's not really, like, there's a small tear. She's like, I could leave it. She's like, but I know you and you're in a townhouse and you have a toddler. She's like, you're not going to be able to rest, are you? So she put one little external stitch, and I honestly don't even know when it fell out. So
Right.
yeah, it was crazy. My body just took over. And I do think that the breathing in between, I think that really, and just feeling comfortable and empowered with all that positive energy around me and making it my own setting, kind of like surrendering to it. Um, that kind of made it the experience it was.
What I think is so cool is that you surrendered because this was not your plan. You wanted to be at home and then a birth center. And then all of a sudden they're like, actually, now you need to not only be in the hospital, you need to be induced, transferring care, like so many things that probably they did feel overwhelming. And you're like,
Yes.
all right, so it's that classic, like, that the term or the phrase, it's like a saying, like have the wisdom to know the difference between the things that you can and cannot control, and then surrender to the things that you can't control. You did that, but you knew very much the things you could control, like the lights, like the energy around you, like having your doula, like having, going and getting yourself food and walking around. And like you were like, I'm not just going to literally take this lying down. Like I'm going to do what I can to make this the best experience possible given the circumstances. And I think as someone listening to your story, that really sticks out to me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're always so good at listening and summarizing. I know it was like a lot to say, but there was just so much going on. And yeah, and it was a long, like, yeah, a long lead up, but I think that it was really important too, because those kind of led to the birth itself. And even though the birth was really quick, um that month and a bit before was so much unknown. And I had to kind of take it week by week and hope that the baby was okay. And then when it was finally that time, I was walked over. And again, yeah, you're really surrendering kind of your power. But I also had power by having my voice
Yeah,
and
that's
and
you nailed it.
using.
Like, oh, so good because it's true. Like this is the whole classic thing about like, people say like birth plans, and you had like this big birth plan. And you knew like some of that stuff wasn't ever gonna go to plan, right? Like you didn't want to have any interventions. Well, you had a Foley induction, like that's an intervention. But you also were able to pause when you were offered, you know, the drug and you're like, okay, let me think about this. You gave yourself time. You didn't allow yourself to feel pressured into making a decision. And thankfully it wasn't an emergency, right? Like it's really cool to hear how you navigated everything. So my question is, what would you say to anybody listening to this who is navigating an induction that they're feeling anxious about?
Yeah, I'd say continue to ask questions. Continue to ask, like, what's the risk? What's the benefit? Because it's not informed consent if they're not telling you what the risk of that
Mhm.
induction is. But also, if you don't have a choice, then you still have choice, right? Like you have choice within that choice, I guess. You can, again, as you said, like, do your music, talk, like, have the people around you or that you talk to that are going to uplift you and not scare you. um, I listened to a bunch of positive induction stories as well in the week leading up, and that helped me. And also power, like, in just, for me, I know a lot of people say, like, I don't want to know, and things will just happen. But for me, having that knowledge and having that background information allowed me to ask the right questions and to get the help I needed. So I do think that power is also, like, that knowledge is also really important, if you're someone like me, because again, giving up that control, but also knowing kind of what you can do in that moment and knowing it's going to be okay. And, your body is amazing. Birth is amazing, no matter how that happens. Um, and hopefully you're someone like me where, the baby in your body still respond okay. And because it can happen. And, then you don't, all that big fear of, like, needing more interventions because you have the intervention, it doesn't have to happen.
Thank you for that. I think that's hopefully very reassuring for people who are listening to this. What would you
Mhm.
say? I know you mentioned you did so many things, like a variety of preparation, but specifically around the push prep course, what would you say was the most helpful for you in preparing for this?
Yeah, I think, like, doing the actual classes, and I like how you have it organized where it's like 30 minutes or an hour. Like, even with a toddler, I was able to kind of, like, pick, no matter what. But I think all the talks as well, like the pushing without fear, I think that I listened to it like midway through. We went on a vacation to Florida for a couple weeks. I listened to it there at the beach side, and I literally had an ice cube and I was doing
Nice.
the whole thing. But then I when I in preparation, I think the day before my last appointment with the OB, I listened to it again, so it was fresh in my mind. That was like, my sister's pregnant right now, and I told her, I'm like, please listen to this. And she's a physio, so she thinks she knows everything, but I really hope she listens to that because that was like that was really helpful for me. I don't know, I might have to go, and, like, I still have access to the court. I might have to, like, go down there and, like, open it up and force
Yeah.
her to listen to it. But that was really helpful for me. And then there's also a whole section on inductions, um and yeah, like the whole fear section with anxiety, tension. Um, I think that was really helpful for me too. Just, like, knowing, like, if you breathe and you relax your face and, you allow yourself to surrender, your body can work with what's going on as opposed to working against you. So I think, yeah. And also, I did the live class. So I honestly listened to your modules, oftentimes twice. So again, the information was just in there, and it was like you were, like, in the back of my head for a lot of it in the courses, and like, in the meetings with the OB, and even just, like, in between, right, when I was kind of anxious and worried about everything.
One thing that I kept hearing in your stories when you were telling me was I kept thinking like, man, Ashley's doing a really good job of protecting her central nervous system because that's in pain science. We know that if your nervous system is upregulated, like the loud noises, the bright lights, that's going to very often throw you off your game and prevent that flow of oxytocin, right? It feels more like a threat. You think of mammals who give birth, like farm cats, they go to like a really dry, quiet, dark place in a barn and give birth to their babies, right? Like they don't go in the center of a bright room, right? That just doesn't, mammals, we don't, we're mammals too. And so I love that you were like, no lights, and you had your playlist,
Yes.
and like you had your eye mask, like you really did work hard to protect that part. And I think that, it made a difference. Sounds like it really made a difference. That's
Yes,
amazing.
it did. Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. I'm so happy for you. What is your second daughter's name? You mentioned Madison is your oldest.
Yeah, my second is McKenna. So
McKenna. Oh,
it literally means born of fire. So she was my rapid fire baby. And it's
Right.
also Irish and Scottish, which my maiden name is Irish and Scottish. So it was on our list for Madison, and it kind of stuck. And especially after that birth, I was like, we have to name her McKenna.
Beautiful. Oh, I'm so
Thank you.
happy for you, Ashley. And big hug. I can hear a little rumblings in the background. Maybe McKenna's waking up. I'm not sure.
In her little active sleep as the little 2-month olds do.
Aw,
Yeah.
so sweet. Well, it's truly an honor to support you. And thank you so much for taking the time. I love to share a positive story, specifically around induction, because there can be so much fear, as you know, you experienced it yourself around it. So, again, thank you. And I am truly hopeful that this helps anyone listening who might be facing an upcoming induction.
Yes, and I can't thank you enough. I wish there was more of you, and I wish I could like do more in this world. And I'm just happy that you're kind of filling that gap that we so need in everywhere in this world right now. It's the birth is just and pregnancy and postpartum. It's all underserved. So yeah, I can't thank you enough, and I keep kind of referring my friends who are pregnant to you because it's really important work. So thank you.